And we are live. Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're tuning in from. Welcome to FutureWork, a weekly live show brought to you by HR leaders and Hacking HR in partnership with our friends at Joveo, the world's AI-powered recruitment marketing platform. Each week, we'll be joined by some of the world's leading HR executives and experts to discuss the latest in HR, technology, AI, and of course, the future of work. I'm Chris Rainey, co-founder at HR Leaders and Atlas Copilot and host of the HR Leaders podcast. As always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Mr. Matt Burns, who's a former HR executive, global industry analyst, and co-founder at Atlas Copilot. How are you doing, Matt?
What crimes have we got involved with? I'm always your partner in crime. I don't know what crimes that we.
I don't know. I just said it one day and then that was it. I stuck to it. But yeah, maybe, yeah.
Petty crimes.
Petty. Well, we're not dangerous. We're not brave enough to do that.
No, we're HR professionals.
Our only crime is starting the show.
Yes.
That's maybe. That's fine. All right, let's get into the topic because otherwise we're just going to have fun and forget about the fact that we've got an amazing guest here. So today we're going to be talking about recruitment automation and what you can do with those savings. As always, we're joined by another partner in crime who's been on a guest. I think it's a fourth appearance, Mr. Christopher Lind, Chief Learning Officer, co-host and author at Future Focused, and executive advisor and coach at Christopher Lind Co. How are you doing, my friend? Nice to see you.
Hey, you know what? It's always good to see you too. And partner in crime, if you involve me, then it's not petty crimes anymore. That's the only big difference.
Oh, no.
If I get involved, then they're serious.
What do they call it in the US? Is like a felony. Is that?
Yeah, Milwaukee's Most Wanted.
Milwaukee's Most Wanted.
Do you know what?
You would have an amazing mugshot, I think.
That's right. With the dark background and then, the beard.
We've got to make it black and white, though. I think, and then
I need a neck tattoo. And then I'd have the whole thing.
As soon as you have that, that's it. Before we jump in, give everyone a bit of an update on about you and your background, and obviously the new focus and the new chapter, because I think for many people that know you already and others that may have just come across you before.
Yeah, so I've been in the learning space basically my whole career, and then was the chief learning officer at ChenMed, and then actually just this week I've transitioned over to doing more executive advising on business transformation in HR and kind of across the business. So that's the new chapter. I wasn't sure if you're talking about that one or the fact we had baby number 8, but I guess both new chapters, have all happened.
Dude, we need to do another show on just baby number 8. Like I don't even understand. But congratulations again.
Thank you.
Was it a boy or a girl?
It was a boy this time. We were banking on a girl to keep a nice even 4-4 split, but
I'm gonna do this to you, and I'm so sorry in advance, but I'm not sorry at the same time. I need to know all 8 names.
All right, this is the quiz. This is the quiz part. Jackson,
live on
Reagan.
LinkedIn.
Yep, Jackson, Reagan, Easton, Brooklyn, Harrison, Chandler, Barrett, and Briggs. There you go.
Well done,
now,
man.
Don't ask me their birthdays. Don't ask me their birthdays.
You know what? That was so impressive because I would have failed miserably at that. Oh,
you have one child.
And I have one child. I literally would have been like, no.
I think I did in my birth order too. So bonus points on that one.
Nice.
Yeah. Tell everyone also about the you mentioned obviously Future Focus. Because I obviously follow the show. Give on a bit of more of an insight on that before we jump in.
Yeah, so I've always been kind of somebody who's been at the cutting edge of what technology is doing and how to apply it and what is its impact. So I started Future Focused 5 years ago just to help people understand it because it's confusing. I mean, even for me, every week I do an update on what's going on. And by the next week, I'm like, well, if you listened to me last week, here's what's changed since then. So it's been fun. You actually helped me get into it. That's the story behind that.
Yeah.
That's why I have the fancy mic I do.
It's funny because like I have that conversation with probably 1,000 people, but you're the only one that actually did it. Like everyone says, "Oh, I want to do this," and then they realize how much work goes into it. They think, "Oh, you just chat on the mic every day. So great people." I'm like, I wish that was as easy as you know, right? The hours of editing, producing, and stuff like that. It is a fun conversation. Speaking of that, let's jump into today's topic straight away. Recruitment automation. This has transformed dramatically, especially with the introduction of generative AI. First and foremost, should we just start off with what is recruitment automation? Because there may be some people out there that kind of have a different view of what that is. So Christopher, you want to kick us off?
So, yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about what it is in case folks aren't familiar,
well, the thing is with it is
the thing that's challenging with it is recruitment automation can mean a whole lot of things. And I think that's actually probably the bigger challenge. I'm sure people have heard, oh yeah, recruitment automation. But then if you were like, yeah, but what does that look like in your organization? You probably would get 50 different answers
Yes.
because it could be, well, talent scouting. It could be interviews being done by AI. It could be, I mean, it could be a whole lot of things, even just process automation, contact, outreach. So I think that's the part where when we're talking about it, we're talking about using generative AI to take on some of the activities of your recruitment team. Which ones, though, I guarantee almost everybody would have a different picture in their head.
Matt?
Yeah, I agree. It's a really nebulous term because it involves everything in the hiring process. We talk also about recruitment marketing and the opportunity to automate the spend and be more efficient with how you allocate resources to finite number of opportunities. So it literally touches every part of the talent acquisition process.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's critically important for organizations to get this right. The opportunity cost of doing this in a more manual way is going to mean you're spending resources in ways that may not be the most efficient way to leverage them in your organizational setting.
Yeah. Well, on that point, then let's narrow it down.
Yeah.
Christopher, what are some of the specific areas of recruitment you're seeing most impacted by automation? Let's start there. Let's narrow it down.
Yeah, I mean, right now, one of the ones I'm seeing start to really take off, I've actually been talking to a lot of people who, they're out interviewing and stuff like that. And the number of ones I've talked to who have been like, I've started having more interviews with bots than I have with people, at least on those first scale ones. That's actually a rising trend, even now that video and voice has gotten so good and the latency of interacting. If they said, if I didn't get a notification on the screen saying you will now be talking to an AI, they wouldn't have actually even known. And so that's dramatically changing the candidate experience big time. But I think it's also changing the way HR operations is running.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest rising trends I'm seeing right now. Matt, I'm really curious. You talked about the marketing side. I'm curious what you're seeing on that end.
Can we double click on that on the
Oh yeah, no,
that
go
first, because I think that's super interesting, right? Because before it didn't work because you had this really horrible lip sync. Like, like the early days.
Yep.
Oh, you had to wait 15 seconds after you finished your response, and you're like, yeah, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Well, that could have been a bad Wi-Fi connection.
It wasn't.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. So I feel like some people need to try it out again. Because I think a lot of people tried it in the early days and it was awful and kind of the lip sync was all over the place and the person was like, even expressions, it was just a bit of a mess.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and like the faces were very, staring through your soul type of it was a pretty horrific experience.
Yeah. And you've interviewed a couple of companies that do this, if I remember correctly, right? What are some of the advances that they've made in that area that are really helping companies?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is what we talked about in terms of latency and even interruptibility, which you might be like, interruptibility, but there's nothing worse than feeling like you have to wait for the conversation to end to pick it back up. And I think that's one of the things that you see with this lower latency is you're engaging in a conversation. And if you want to add something to it as it's talking, you can actually jump in and continue the conversation.
Yeah.
And the not waiting. Now, if you look at where it's coming from, like the ability to speak to a human being that doesn't look like an empty vessel, they look so much better. The mannerisms are more natural. And again, even the look of the lips moving and stuff, it doesn't feel like you're talking to a bot. But I think the other piece is it's getting better. I'll be careful on this. It's getting better even at detecting more of like what's going on with the candidate.
Yes.
So you're getting a lot more data from the conversation than just the transcript of what was said. And I think that's really impressive.
Yeah, the interruptibility, I don't know if that's the way of saying it, right? That was one of the biggest.
We just coined that term
I think
today.
like you just, hashtag, that's quite a long hashtag actually to write down. But that was, just for understand the context of everyone, that was the latest and greatest thing that ChatGPT was screaming about for their last update. So the last update of ChatGPT's voice capability was the fact that you can interrupt it. And it's a game changer because now, I didn't mean that. I meant this. Or actually, can you tell me a bit more? Like, it now becomes a conversation because that's not how we speak, right? As human beings, we do go back and forth. So that was it.
Well, I mean, listen to this conversation. When have one of us waited for the other one to finish before we jumped in?
Really
and
terrible.
That is a very human. Well, but it's a very human thing to do because something pops into your head based on what's being said, and you're like, "Oh, I need to add this, or I need to do this," and that, OpenAI came out with it. You're a couple weeks behind on your updates, Chris, because it's not the latest thing from OpenAI, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. But no, I mean, that is a serious thing that really does change the human dynamic. Is when you feel like you say something and then you wait and then you get a question and then you answer and then you wait. I mean, that feels robotic. And granted, I've had plenty of interviews over my career where that's what it was like with a human being. So in some ways, I would almost say AI can feel more natural than a bad interviewer.
Yeah. Matt, do you think this is going to impact the candidate experience?
I'm of two minds. I'm always like, half my mind is like, this is going to be amazing from a consistency perspective, because let's be honest, in most large corporate settings, you're giving people interview guides. They follow a script. So the interviewer doesn't have a ton of agency. They're predetermined questions, it's predetermined scorecards, and they're going through a very sequential order of asking questions. Is that much different than having a bot be the interface? I don't really know. What scares me is bias. And by the way, it exists with the human interface as well. I mean, let's not pretend that bias doesn't exist when humans interview humans, but there's this fear out there that AI is going to introduce new kinds of bias that might discriminate against people who have different last names, different countries of origin, different genders. And I think there's been some very, very public displays of this in the past. So I think as long as we can assure that we're making the right decisions and not introducing bias that's going to impact the candidate experience, that to me seems like an efficiency that would actually benefit, because then you at least create consistency for the candidate in the process.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this is going to lead to more or less pressure for the candidate, because not everyone does well in interview settings as it is. Not everyone's designed to be to thriving in interview setting. We know that there's the research out there. Now I'm looking at a code. Am I going to be less stressed by talking to?
So what's interesting on this is right now, and this is kind of the change curve we're on. People are a little weirded out by it still. They're pretty weirded out. They kind of get the thing like, you will now be having a conversation with AI. And I don't know that we've quite gotten to a point where people are 100% comfortable with it. But to your point, Chris, I think with time, people are going to become more comfortable because it feels less pressured.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, you're like, well, at least nobody's judging me, even though AI is judging you 1,000 times more because it can analyze literally everything you did.
Every facial expression.
How many blinks. You blinked 16 times in that minute, and you're like, whoa, wow, I didn't think I did.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning, the automation. What are some of the things, Matt, that you're seeing companies and creative ways they're using just to use these cost savings? Where are they allocating those cost savings?
Yeah, we start talking about marketing. So let's think about recruitment marketing. Let's think about organizations that are trying to get the right candidates and roles and trying to get those opportunities in front of the right people. And they're allocating thousands of dollars to making sure that happens. Now, if that spend, as in a traditional marketing sense, isn't efficiently allocated, well, then the opportunity cost could be things like learning and development programs or wellness programs or diversity and inclusion programs, because I've not met an HR executive in my career that ever says, I have an abundance of resources. They're all fighting within a very small budget, and it's about the return on the investment. So if they can get the maximum return on their investment, then they can reallocate those resources to things that actually make a difference beyond just simply spending in a way that may not be the most responsible way of doing it. So where I go to next is the biggest bang for your buck. I worked in a retail setting where we didn't have a lot of resources. So in that sense, we were always looking for, how do we spend money to enhance the employee experience, to increase retention of employees? Because it's far more costly to bring somebody new into the organization than to keep the people you already have. So that would be an area I would start. Or employee experience. Now we're operating in a hybrid work environment. How do we solve for the intrinsic motivation, discretionary effort, and then productivity equation, which every organization now is trying to wrestle with, which is intrinsic motivation can't be compelled. It's not carrot and stick. It has to come from within. But to do that, the organization and its leaders need to create the conditions for people to be motivated in the first place.
Christopher?
So I take I agree with the actual, if we're talking just financial resources, that I would completely agree with what Matt said. I think one of the things that not enough discussion is being had about is like, so what do we do with like people's time then? Because obviously the natural thought is, oh, I guess we need less recruiters. If we have these AI bots,
That's the fear,
then
right?
they're just going to do all the recruiting. We don't need any recruiters. And that's definitely one path you could take, but I wouldn't advise it, because I think actually the better path is, if you look at oftentimes what people don't have time to, because they're trying to keep up on their recruiter load, is how do we have better relationships with our business partners to better understand the jobs we're even recruiting for? How do we build stronger relationships with the candidates so that we have time to follow up with them on where we are in the process and things like that, to actually create a better candidate experience across the board and build the reputation with the business leaders who, I mean, I've been around it enough where they're like, yeah, you're not finding the right kind of candidates. Well, that's because we don't have time to actually get to understand what you're doing, help challenge, your thinking around what kind of candidates you're considering and stuff like that. So it actually, done right, is freeing up the time to spend time on more of those strategic business building activities versus, okay, I got to get through 20 candidates to try and find the one that we have a follow-up conversation with.
Does it become harder then, if you did that, to then justify the ROI of having both?
It's just a different conversation that you're having. So I think it's about balancing it. And in every organization, you're going to have to look at what you do.
That's the
now,
natural thing, is they're going to be like, well, if I'm investing here, then we have to cut here. I know that shouldn't be, it's saying, hey, actually, no, you're freeing up those people to have more strategic, valuable conversations, which is what they should be doing, rather than being bogged down in time suck activities to be able to do that. But the fear, and I was speaking to a CHRO today of a 100,000 plus organization around Atlas Copilot, our own agent, and she was like, Chris, when I introduced this to the team, it was met with fear of like, this is replacing me, so I need to overcome that battle. So let's do a shorter pilot. We're going to bring in 10, 20 of the people that actually really are on board, advocates. But this has got to be slow, Chris, because our recruiters are thinking you're coming in to take my job. So that's also part of the challenge that we need to overcome.
Well, and some of it has to do with expectation setting. And that's where I caution people, because they see some of this automation stuff and immediately jump to, look how much money we'll save. And it's like, be very careful, because you set those expectations with your business stakeholders, then that's exactly what they're going to expect. But if you come in with a holistic approach and go, we're doing this, which, yes, it's going to free up efficiencies, which we think is going to get, our time to hire down, things like that. Great. And here's some of the other pain points you've been describing about the relationship we have, or the quality of candidates we've been able to find, things like that. We're also going to do that. And if you set those balanced expectations, there may just be less pressure to go, okay, so we bought that thing, so we don't need recruiters anymore. And honestly, the expectations, that's where I've seen more people get tripped up than anywhere else, is they make these big checks, cut these big checks. It's like, well, then you got to cash them. And then it comes down to, well, I guess we don't need as many people.
It's a challenge, especially with this area, because the area of AI is almost like its own new category. And many companies don't know where to... Sorry, someone just fell over in the studio. You okay? Health and safety? So,
days since incident, reset to zero.
Yeah, reset zero. Yeah, I forgot about that. Matt would know that environment from his background. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that, Matt? Sorry, I got completely thrown off there.
No, I think it comes down to what Christopher was saying, which is about contracting. And Christopher and I have both led restructuring projects. One of the first things that I learned the hard way is, when you undertake any kind of restructuring, is you contract with your team. What's the scope of the restructuring? And be very clear. If we're going to introduce artificial intelligence, it is not a precursor to job loss. Now, don't say that if you don't mean it, but if you actually mean it, then say that, and then that will pick people's fear down a couple of notches, and you can involve them in the solutioning process so that they can themselves see it, but also help you identify the art of the possible. One thing we talk a lot with people about is they often don't get asked for their opinion. It ultimately defaults into a cost savings or a resource savings conversation. Whereas if you challenge that assumption and say, okay, maybe we want to see some sort of reallocation as opposed to reduction, but then in order to make that argument, you have to have a compelling business case to put something forward, other than that doesn't feel good isn't a business case, right? So what are you going to spend your time? Are your recruit leaders going to spend more time doing employment branding or university campus sourcing or more time with talent development and succession? Like and then what's the ROI of those activities? Because if you do this well, any innovation, whether it's AI or elsewise, can become the first spin of a virtuous circle where you take the savings and reinvest it back in the organization. If you don't make that case, don't be surprised when somebody comes down the door and knocks on your door and says, okay, you spent this was your ROI, now I need the payback.
Yeah.
Yep.
I can feel the energy of both of you reliving horrors.
Yeah.
Both of you,
Well, and I think the horrors that I'm so intent about right now, and it's why actually I went out to spend more time helping people with this, is there is such a gross misunderstanding still of what AI is and what it's good at and what it's not good at. And so I'm spending way more time helping people figure out where should we use this and where should we not, because you can get yourself in a whole lot of trouble if you're not careful, because you can go, oh, AI is so great, I just heard AI can do this and it's basically like a person, so we can do this. And that's where I've come in and gone, hang on, because you're not taking these risks into account, or you're not looking at this, or here's actually where it is on the maturity curve. And if you bank on this, it will blow up in your face. And the problem with AI is it does everything a million times faster than people do. So if you screw this up,
it's a big scale. Yeah.
You're gonna feel the pain of this a million times faster and a million times more intense. And so it's not something you want to take lightly and just go, well, I promised the CFO that we could cut 30% out by implementing AI and we'll see where it goes. You just don't want to make that mistake, because it's a lot harder to clean up.
I've had so many conversations in the last couple of months where companies have rolled out, any of the examples you've just mentioned is blown up in their face. And now, because of that one thing, the rest of the company is now sort of penalized, and they're like, the IT and security are like, no. We're not doing anything. And
I mean, I advise one CEO, his business closed. I mean, the mistake was so catastrophic,
really,
that the business closed.
Wow.
And it's like, whoa. And so, I mean, that's an extreme case. So
you've got to be intentional about it. There's got a lot of things in place. Two things that I kind of wrote down when we was thinking about this topic, and I've seen where people reinvest funds. We've already mentioned it a little bit, but definitely one is in strengthening talent pipelines. So building long-term relationships. You need to build a long-term relationship with candidates now. It's not like you need to slowly nurture them, provide value, content, learning, even if they're not even working for you. Right, that's something that, and companies have to reinvent the way they do that. There's this thing called social media.
Yeah,
that exists
totally.
As well. There's things like Glassdoor and others, but they're pretty outdated. I think that there needs to be a much better system in place to continuously nurture that talent, and that could be with internships, co-op programs, partnerships. Partnerships with educational institutions. You name it, the list goes on. And the other side, very quickly, Matt, is then focusing more on internal mobility programs, right? Every conversation we have now, it's like, Chris, we're rolling out our talent marketplace, right? That's so I think it's important, because why is that important? One, there's incredible amounts of skills that already exist in your organizations that you probably don't know about. Two, you need development opportunities. You're going to retain those people in the business as well. And the pace of innovation and change, we have to be able to have a talent marketplace to keep up with that pace as well. So there's many other reasons, but those are sort of two areas where I'm seeing companies doing an amazing job of doing that and moving to more sort of project-based, skills-based organizations by reinvesting time and energy in there as well. Go on, Matt, sorry, I only wanted to add something there.
Well, on the other end, alumni organizations don't
we need to bring those back. They kind of were like a thing, and then they disappeared. We need to bring back alumni. That's
because especially in today's environment where, let's be honest, when we grew up in the workplace, it was an expectation that you would kind of take a linear path. You'd come out of college, university, or high school, walk into a job, and you'd spend 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years in a career. And now it's much more common that people spend 2 to 3 years in a role, and they'll boomerang back.
Yes.
So they'll start with an organization, have a good experience, and then maybe their life circumstances change. Maybe they want a different experience or different opportunity. But if they were treated well when they were there, and they're treated well after they left, nothing precludes them from coming back. So the opportunity to elongate that, to include alumni programs, keeping people up to date with what's happening with the company, the core values, successes you're having, roles and opportunities, It's relatively inexperienced to be thoughtful, especially in today's reality when you have social media, when we have content being able to create it at scale with very limited resources. So there's, at this point, organizations could reinvest that time in keeping tabs on their key performers to make sure that there's an opportunity for them to come back.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd add on this is, we talked about people are going to be doing different things if you're doing this right. You're not just like, and that requires a change in people's skill set.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to have recruiters now spending more time with the business stakeholders to understand the roles, or engaging with alumni to try, they need new skills to do that. And they need space and time to build them. And that's not something that you do by sending them a, LinkedIn learning course and saying, there, you're done, right? Like, we're good.
Sorry,
like,
LinkedIn,
no,
don't close off our stream. Please
no. I mean,
it's,
come on, I'm a former CLO. Like, it plays a role in it, but you can't just send it and then call it good. And I think that's one of the things that this is a change. I've said on my podcast many times, every single job on the planet is going away as you know it today. Doesn't matter what you're doing. What you're doing today is going away in some capacity. And that means there's going to be change. And change takes energy and time and resources. And it's not something that you flip a light switch.
Yeah. What have we not covered? I feel like one of the things we haven't covered more is the DEI. I think this is also a great opportunity to reallocate funds towards building more inclusive hiring practices, talent pipelines, partnering with organizations to represent to focus on underrepresented groups,
removing barriers that are systemic.
Yeah, I think that's I know obviously we've seen the whole political landscape and backlash right now, so it's a tough time on that. But I feel like during these times, it's even more important to double down. And you see the companies that are truly committed, they're doubling down on that.
Because there's a good business reason to do it.
Yes, it's also, it's not just because it's a nice to have, it's good business.
It's
right?
good business to draw from diverse talent sources, to have diverse voices around the table,
100%.
To have diverse decision making. We are in an increasingly global environment where people's perspectives really matter. And again, the tools with which we can gather their information and make use of it have never been easier.
Yeah.
So we need to be more thoughtful about introducing more diversity into decision making, because ultimately your customers, your stakeholders, your employees are diverse.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and the nice thing with AI is going back to Matt's point earlier about it being more objective. If you're not getting the kind of diversity you want, you can fine tune it. And it's not how do we have these awkward, uncomfortable conversations with people to try and get the needle moving on this. It's a lot easier to dial in on, well, hey, here's the analytics of what we're doing. We need to increase how we're reaching different audiences. How do we do that? And it's a more strategic, data-driven decision instead of, tummy feels conversation that can make people uncomfortable, which is a good start.
We could get into the whole technology piece of it, but we have to do a whole other show in terms of reinvesting into other technology. I do want you brought up something earlier, and I want to kind of use this to wrap us up, Christopher, is you said, like, you talk a lot about the do's and don'ts, or what you can and cannot do with AI.
Yeah.
Could you just share your thoughts on each briefly, just to give our, because that's a big challenge for everyone listening right now, is there's kind of like a minefield out there coming at them. What are some of the things that they should be thinking about? And maybe, if you can, provide some questions that you feel they should be asking when they're entering these conversations as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that is a big don't is not to apply AI to something that you don't fully understand yet. And we'd like to oftentimes think, we understand recruiting. It's like, but do you really? Like, have you taken the time to understand how the recruiting process works in your organization and the kind of priorities you have? And, like, have you actually deconstructed that? Because a lot of times there's this urgency to go, recruiting's a thing, let's throw AI at it. And it's like, whoa, there's dynamics in the way your organization operates. There's things you need to understand that people just do on their own. You don't have to tell them. They just adapt and do this stuff. AI doesn't. And so you can automate something and go, it's all slick. And then you find out, oh, I guess we didn't know about this whole thing that was going on in the organization that we didn't apply AI to because we didn't know what was happening. And that can be a real miss. I think one of the other things is just being really careful about thinking about human experience, because at the end of the day, people are really good at certain things, critical problem solving, interpersonal interactions. And I know we're talking about how AI can do interviews. It can, when you think about what kind of interviews. Well, the kind of like frontline screening ones, the ones where we're just trying to get a better feel for who a person is. It is a more robotic task. Do you want to apply AI to do a final round with a candidate? Probably not, because at that point you're trying to really assess culture and fit and where do they go, and you want to dig into some of those deeper things, and so you just don't want to over index on it. And I think that's the risk. I see a lot of people either under indexing, they don't know what it can do, or they don't understand the operations, they don't know where to apply it, or they over index. There's not enough of that critical middle.
Who do you think needs to be in the room for these conversations from day one?
So depends on who you're talking about. But if you're looking at kind of that deconstructing work, this is another mistake, is you can avoid not including the people actually doing the work.
That's why I'm asking it.
And you can be like, oh, well, we got a good idea of how it works. It's like, no, you need to bring people in. And I think to the point you or Matt brought up earlier, you got to recognize there's going to be some resistance. So you're going to have to focus on trust building first, because when you go, hey, we're talking about AI automation for recruiting, Mr. or Mrs. Recruiter, can you join us? They're going to be like, yeah, heck no, I'm not telling you what we actually do, because I know exactly where this is going. And so you got to think of the front end of that trust building, but they've got to be in the room, or you're going to make some colossal mistakes.
Yeah. I'm glad you just said it out loud, because I just keep seeing that happen over and over again with companies, and it kind of bringing them later on in the stage, and then it's too late.
But here's the other risk. If you have that conversation and you haven't contracted, what does it do around people's motivation? It demotivates them. What happens to their performance? It starts to drop, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As people say, oh, okay, well, the humans aren't as efficient as AI becomes, and you actually make a bad problem worse because it creates false signals around the business case for artificial intelligence, when in reality, it's an employee engagement and an employee experience question.
All right, everyone.
But I think that goes back to the trust building.
I agree.
Why it's so important to build trust along the way, so that they don't go, yeah, I know what I'm involved in the automation of recruiting project. Like I'm looking for a job because I know where this is going. And you got to build that trust first, or that will happen.
Amazing. I can't believe we got through this conversation in half an hour with us three. We did it.
I know, because it could have been a half-day event, and we still would have been fine.
We said before the show, everyone, that when we get together, we never can make half an hour. We just 34 minutes. That's fine. We know there's an intro, as well. Before I let you go, Christopher, where can people follow you, learn more about what you're doing? So
I'm super active on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Substack. And so LinkedIn, if you want to kind of keep up to date on the latest of what's happening, if you like following my content and can tolerate my voice, then YouTube and Substack is where you go.
Yeah, and wherever you are listening or watching, we'll throw links in the chat, so they're here or here, wherever you are. They're going to be there. Also, make sure you hit the bell notification on Christopher's profile, because next time he posts, you'll get notified. So on LinkedIn now, if you don't kind of hit that little icon, not many people don't know about, like, you don't really get a notification. So if you're on Christopher's page,
you got to say hit the notification bell on LinkedIn now.
That's the thing.
Right.
Yeah. So just if you didn't know that, and similar for our show, if you want to tune in every week to the show, whether you're listening on Hacking HR right now or HR Leaders, or on Joveo's site, hit the little bell notification icon. And that time, next time we post content, you will actually get a notification as well. So make sure you do that, because I know many people don't know about that. Apart from that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our friends at Joveo for helping us bring it together. Directly beneath this video or in the LinkedIn chat, there's a link there to download their report on the top 10 best recruitment practices to attract, source, engage, and hire talent. So great segue from the show. If you enjoyed the episode, like, comment, hit the repost button on LinkedIn. And apart from that, have a good weekend. And we'll see you the same time next week. See you later, everyone. Bye-bye.